One Book, One Boulder brings our community together through reading and discussion of a single book. This is our third such program since the Boulder Library kicked off the first one in 2020 with the Boulder Library Foundation's support. This year's One Book programming brought us together for the first time in person. Together, we've watched films, enjoyed panel discussions, and experienced gallery exhibits, music, art, journaling, and meditation. I'd like to take a moment to thank the wonderful staff of Boulder Public Library who have made this all possible. Librarians, please raise your hands, stand up, receive our thanks and appreciation. Job well done. Aren't they terrific? All this programming has centered around the concepts presented in the Book of Joy by tonight's presenting author, Doug Abrams. Doug is a celebrated author, editor, literary agent, social entrepreneur, and catalyst for good. He works with true visionaries to create a wiser, healthier, and more just world. Throughout all of his wide-ranging projects, Doug aspires to help build a prism through which life-changing conversations and experiences can be created and nourished. Thank you, Doug, for being with us tonight. What a treat to have this dialogue with you here in Boulder. Our moderator tonight is Pedro Silva, a veteran of the United States Air Force, a former corporate recruiter, a former pastor in the socially active United Church for Christ, and an incredibly effective community organizer. Pedro has helped us address affordable housing and homelessness, gun violence, economic justice, and community resilience in the wake of the shooting at the Boulder King Soopers. He is currently Director of Engagement with Unify, a nonprofit that reduces polarization and cultural divisions of all kinds through bridging to help us solve the key challenges of our time. Please welcome Doug Abrams, who will present about the Book of Joy, followed by a conversation with Pedro Silva. We will open for audience questions near the end of the event. Pedro, Doug, welcome to the Boulder Public Library. Doug, the stage is yours.
Good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to be back in Boulder. Chris thanked the incredible staff here at the Boulder Library, which I also wanted to do because our libraries are really sanctuaries of culture and civility in our societies. And it's just a real joy to be with you all this evening and to be celebrating our libraries, our books, and our culture together. Before we begin, I was thinking that we might do a little embodied joy. And, has anybody heard about a wave like they do at football games? Well, it's not just for football games. And I want to see if Boulder can do a wave like other cities that I've spoken to and see how much energy we have in the room tonight. So we're going to start over here. We're going to do a little wave. So uncross your legs. We're going to see how Boulder shows up for joy. 1, 2, 3. All right, that was pretty good. Give yourselves a round of applause. That was awesome. Well, just so I have a sense of who's in the room tonight, how many folks have had a chance to read the Book of Joy? A few people. How many people have seen the Mission Joy film on Netflix or elsewhere? Fantastic. And how many folks have had a chance to read the Book of Hope with Jane Goodall? That's coming to you soon then. So this evening, I would like to take you all on a life-changing road trip to Dharamsala, India, to give you a little bit of behind-the-scenes view of the experience of being in Dharamsala. And I wanted to take the opportunity to say that for those of you who have seen the film, you got to see the extraordinary relationship and energy that was in the room. And we tried to bottle that up in the book as well. And it was so ecstatic and almost intolerable to be in the room but only relieved by the fact that we knew we were going to be able to share it with the world. And so it's just been an incredible gift to be able to share the book and the film with the world. We're now in about 40 countries with the book, and it's just been amazing, the response all over the world. But to give you a sense of the road trip that we're going to be taking tonight, I'd like to show you a little video that will introduce you to the destination.
You don't wake up in the morning and say, hey, I'm going to become a friend to the Dalai Lama. It just happens. You see, he's not listening.
I will not listen.
Behave like a holy man.
How are you doing, everyone? Are we ready?
People innately are good, you know.
All have same sort of desire to have happy life, happy day, happy month.
When we kept quiet, our hearts discovered that they were kindred.
Our religion is something unique and something very special.
So this was the question that we set out to answer in our Joy Dialogue. And I wanted to say that you see these extraordinary mischievous men together. They call each other their mischievous spiritual brothers. And I don't know how many people have heard about the controversy that's going around with the video with the Dalai Lama, which I will happy to address in the question and answers today. I think there's been a sad misinterpretation of him and his culture and his very mischievous sense of humor, but I can give you a sense of what I've learned and the context for understanding that. But the big question is, who's this guy? And how did he get to be in that picture? So I think to understand who that guy is, you first have to know that I have been on a mission since I was a book editor at HarperCollins and set up my own agency called Idea Architects, working with visionaries who are creating a wiser, healthier, more just world. And I made a list when I left HarperCollins that started with Desmond Tutu and ended with Stephen Hawking of the people I most wanted to work with in the world. The Dalai Lama and Jane Goodall were on the list as well. And I've had the incredible joy of getting to work with all of them and help them share their messages with the world. But to really know the tall guy in the middle, I think you need to know that I grew up in New York in an extremely loving home, but the house, as some of you may have read in the Book of Joy, was shrouded by depression. And at the age of 7, I was one leg over the balcony of our 20th floor apartment, deciding whether I wanted to stick around. And I think in many ways, my journey to understand joy and sorrow, suffering and happiness began on that ledge. So in many ways, my entire life, I think, led me to prepare myself to be a conduit for this understanding of joy. So many people ask, how did it all begin? And the answer is with sandwiches. Like so many good things, because we were at Archbishop Tutu's wife's birthday party in South Africa, and I've had the incredible privilege of being at many of these birthday parties over the course of the 2 decades that I got to work with Archbishop Tutu, work on his book projects with him, what he calls the mementos of our friendship, what he called before his death last year, and to have him as a friend, as a mentor, and as a second father. It was really one of the most incredible blessings in my life. And we were at his wife's birthday. We were sitting at the office, and the chairman of the Dalai Lama Foundation turned to me and said, "What do you think about the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu doing a book together?" And I said, "Wow, that would be amazing. What do you think it would be about?" And we both paused for a second, and we turned to each other, and we said, "Joy." Because if any two people on the planet could teach us how to be joyful in the face of adversity, it was these two men. So I turned to Archbishop Tutu and I said, "Hey, Arch," which was one of his nicknames here. We call him Father or Arch. And said, "Hey, Arch, you want to do a book with the Dalai Lama?" And he said, "I'd do anything with that man." And so when I met the Dalai Lama for the first time in Washington, D.C., after we were arranging this gathering, as you can imagine, to try to coordinate their social calendars to get the two of them in the same place for the dialogue was quite a job. But when I met with His Holiness, he said, he took my hand and he said, "You know, when I got the letter, I got a little excited." So I was like, if you're getting the Dalai Lama a little excited, you're doing a good thing. So this is a picture on the plane to Dharamsala. It was an incredible challenge to try to figure out how to get these two men together, because the Dalai Lama was supposed to come to Arch's 80th birthday in South Africa, but because of pressure from China, the South African government didn't give him a visa. And Archbishop Tutu's prostate cancer had returned, and his doctors were not letting him leave the country. So we got the call that Archbishop Tutu was cleared by his doctors to go, and we knew that we had this very small window to get him to Dharamsala and arrange everything at the foothills of the Himalayas for this conversation. Here is we are landing on the tarmac in the Dharamsala in the foothills. And you can see my wife, Rachel, is the one with the camera over there. She's actually she was Archbishop Tutu's doctor and kept him on the planet, I think, about 10 years longer than we thought we'd have him. But she's also, her real genius is as a cinematographer. In a pinch, they wouldn't let them, for security reasons, they wouldn't let us have any cameras there, and so it was thanks to her that we got the footage of landing. I love just the under the yellow umbrella, so this is the picture of them landing and being together for the first embrace, after the mischievous His Holiness puckered up his lips, Arch went in for a kiss on the cheek, and His Holiness was laughing. I think it was the first time he had been kissed since he was 2 years old. We knew this was a historic occasion. We didn't know we were going to be making a movie, but we knew we had to capture it for posterity. And we had no idea how much it would mean to the two of them. And we were so focused on, what it would mean for everybody else that we had no idea that just for two world leaders and two inspiring spiritual masters to get to hang out with their buddy was going to be one of the highlights of their life. We were given very clear instructions that this was not to be a Christian book or a Buddhist book. It was meant to be a universal human book about the nature of joy and how we experience joy in the face of adversity. We really knew that this could be the last time that they would ever be together, and it turned out that it was. And no pressure. But we knew that this was the one chance to get it and get it right, and create this gift for humanity. We had to change the itinerary twice because of two funerals that Arch had to attend, and we were very aware that mortality was with us in the room. With that awareness, I was awoken at 3 o'clock in the morning the night before the talks as if I had been shaken. And the Dalai Lama gets up at 3 in the morning to meditate and pray every night. I only get up at 3 o'clock in the morning when my demons get me up. And the demon that got me up on this occasion was the demon of self-doubt. And I was just kind of ruminating on the fact that I am not Oprah Winfrey, I am not Anderson Cooper, and who the hell was I, and when were they going to show up so I could sit down? And I went out onto the balcony of the hotel where we were staying, and in this guest house in Dharamsala, and I suddenly was transported back to the balcony of my childhood. And I heard Arch's voice say, it doesn't matter who you are, sometimes you're the one in the room. And you need to do what wants to happen and let what wants to happen through you. And after that, the entire week was bliss because I was able to get out of my own way and know that I was just a conduit, an ambassador from the world to come and seek the wisdom of these two extraordinary men. The next morning, as we got ready, as you saw from the little clip of, when I was asking, are we ready, everyone? And then I gazed into His Holiness's eyes, and I had been told that when His Holiness looks in your eyes, he can see directly into your soul and tell you what your soul needs to hear. Now, I'm usually very skeptical about these kinds of things. I'm from New York, and, that's kind of not how we roll. But I was interested to look into his eyes and see what happened. So I looked deeply into his eyes, he looked deeply into my eyes, and he said, "Button up your shirt, your chest hair is showing." Which I guess is what my soul needed to hear. So day one, we discussed the nature of true joy. And as you all know, since you have read the book and many of you read the film, they talk about the distinction between the kind of ephemeral pleasure and joy that we get from a nice piece of chocolate cake or listening to a good song, what we would call the state of joy, into what we were trying to bottle up, which was the trait of joy. How do we actually go from joy being an ephemeral state that comes and goes, and sometimes we have it and sometimes we don't, to something that is more enduring in our life? And that was, we began that conversation on the first day, and here's a little video of the Dalai Lama talking about the nature of our joy and happiness.
Everybody seeks happiness, joyfulness, but from outside, from money, from power, from material, from big car, from big house. The ultimate source of happiness is within ourselves. Love, kindness, not mission, not technology, not money, not power.
We find a deep, deep dissatisfaction in out and out materialism, because we are made for something greater than this. We are meant for the infinite.
So there are 4 fundamental human emotions: fear, anger, sadness, and joy. These are the 4 notes on the keyboard of our emotional human life, from which we create the symphonies of our experience. And as you can see, 3 of those, fear, anger, and sadness, often called negative or afflictive emotions, cause people an enormous amount of pain and suffering. Joy, as they told us, is our baseline state. And these other emotions basically evolve to help us get back to that state. Now, for those of you who have seen the film, you know that there's quite a debate in the film between the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Tutu about how much We can control fear, anger, and sadness. The Dalai Lama was quite adamant that through mental immunity, through cultivating our mental practices, we can reduce the amount of fear, anger, or sadness that we experience. Archbishop Tutu said, yeah, well, but because we're human, we're still going to have fear, anger, and sadness. And what I finally realized was that they were talking about different points of our emotional cycle, the Krebs cycle of our emotional life. Yes, if we do our practices, if we evolve and mature, and as Archbishop Tutu said, it takes time to be human. As we evolve ourselves, we can reduce the amount of fear, anger, and sadness that we experience. But inevitably, we are going to fall into states of fear, anger, and sadness. And as Arch has reminded us, we should not add shame to that fear, anger, and sadness and feel badly that we are just being human. So they told us that joy is greater than happiness. Happiness, it fundamentally depends on external circumstances. You know, we're going to be happy when we're going to pursue happiness, the pursuit of happiness, which is enshrined in our Declaration of Independence. We are going to pursue it. We're going to experience it when we have the job, when we have the partner. Something outside of ourselves is going to lead us to be happy. Whereas what they reminded us of is the fact that joy is an internal experience and state that we have access to at all times. So this is a picture of Archbishop Tutu in a Sudanese refugee camp, which sadly has fallen back into conflict. But this was during the previous conflict, and he was there in a refugee camp that a friend of mine was describing as one of the most hopeless and despairing and unjoyful places in the world, where the parents were wondering whether their kids were going to have enough food to eat or drink or be attacked in the night. And Archbishop Tutu, in the midst of all of this suffering, steps forward and starts to sing. And then the refugees all joined him in singing, and then he began to dance, and they began to dance with him. And my friend Shannon, after that evening, asked him, and he said, Arch, how can you be joyful in one of the most unjoyful places in the world? And he said, it is not that I am not sad. It is that I choose to bring joy. And I think that is a powerful reminder that by bringing joy to others, as he did in that refugee camp, we can bring joy to ourselves. So the second and third days were about overcoming the obstacles to joy. And we talked about everything from irritation and frustration to illness and fear of death. And overcoming those obstacles, we knew was essential for the book and for the film, because we didn't want this to be some idealized version of joy, some don't worry, be happy. It needed to live in the reality of the adversity that we experience in our own lives and in the world that we are in. So here's a little video of Arch talking about us and the process of overcoming those obstacles to our joy.
You are made for perfection. You are not yet perfect. You are a masterpiece in the making.
In spite, 80 years old, still I consider student.
Really?
Really. Every day learning.
Yes. You are wonderful.
Oh, I expect that kind of comment.
We see him so serene and calm, but there was a time when he too it's like muscles that have to be exercised.
Growth. It takes time. Oh, minute by minute. Oh, day by day, month by month, year by year, decade by decade.
Start where you are. Do what you can. you will be surprised by the joy.
Arch and His Holiness reminded us that the pursuit of happiness is actually the fastest way to miss the bus. They said that there are these other human qualities that we must cultivate from which joy comes. And they gave us the 8 pillars of joy, which you may remember. And there are 4 pillars of the mind and 4 pillars of the heart. The 4 pillars of the mind, it starts with perspective. And this is really key. And frankly, if you take one thing away from the book or the film, it's really that the perspective that you have on life makes all the difference in how you experience that life. And they reminded us that if we focus just on the heartache and the heartbreak or the thing that is aggravating us, that is all we see. That becomes our entire reality. But if we step back and see it in its proper perspective, then it takes its proper place and we see it in the long sweep of our life and in the long sweep of our experience. From perspective, we move to humility. Because when we have that proper humility, we see ourselves as one of the 8 billion people on the planet, no better and no worse than anyone else. From that sense of humility, we move to humor, because we're able to laugh at ourselves. We're able to remind ourselves that we are just human and that all of those challenges that we have are part of the human comedy. And I asked Arch, I said, your sense of humor isn't cutting, it's not harsh, it's not belittling. And he said, no, it's kind of like stand next to me and we'll laugh at me and then we'll laugh at you. And it's this wonderful reveling in our shared humanity. And that's what you see. I mean, the film is it's like a comedy film, right? It's like this buddy film, and it's them teasing each other mercilessly with this incredible love and friendship. And it's really interesting because when we tease our friends in this way, that is really kind of a shared kind of recognition of our intimacy and our bond and our trust and our love for one another and our shared humanity. And from humor, when we're able to laugh at ourselves, we're able to accept our life and the reality of what is. And as you may remember, the title of the chapter on acceptance is called Acceptance, the Only Place from Which Real Change Can Occur. It's not about acquiescence. It's not about accepting reality in a fatalistic sense, but it is an acceptance of the reality that is now that we need to try to change. And Archbishop Tutu would never have been able to bring apartheid to its knees if he had not accepted the reality of what he was confronting. From the 4 pillars of the mind, we move to the 4 pillars of the heart, because when we're able to accept the reality of what is in our present reality, then we can also accept the reality of what was. And we can learn to forgive those who have harmed us, we can forgive ourselves, and we can unchain ourselves from that past. And Arch was quite adamant, as the kind of global icon for forgiveness, that forgiveness is not something we do for others. It's something we do for ourselves because it is essential to our own freedom. From forgiveness, when we're able to let go of the hope of a different past, we move into gratitude for all that we have and all of the abundance in our lives. And in that gratitude, we then have a natural compassion for wanting others to have as much abundance and benefit and as we have in our lives, and that leads naturally to compassion. And from compassion, which is that sense of understanding the needs of others, not just empathy, it's not just the recognition of the pain of others, but really understanding what others need, then we can move to generosity, which is our natural response to compassion. And we can be generous with our resources, with our time. We can also have this extraordinary quality that I think is what you see in these two men and with other quite wonderfully developed people, which is a generosity of the spirit. It's a way of facing life that is a generous and accepting way of seeing life. So when we went to the scientists to kind of contradict or confirm the things that they were saying, we worked with one scientist named Sonia Lubomirsky at UC Riverside, and her research and experimentation on joy and happiness showed that several of the pillars, their ability to have perspective, to reframe negative experiences more positively, and gratitude and kindness and generosity. So 4 of the pillars that they talked about were the things that she found were most crucial for increasing our joy and happiness in our life. And she, in her research, found that about 50% of our set point for joy and happiness is temperamental. So in other words, if you grew up in New York, it's relatively low. If you're from Boulder or California, it's much higher. But then 50% you can actually influence that sense of the amount of joy and happiness that you experience in your life. Richie Davidson, an amazing scientist at the University of Wisconsin who's been studying the brain and meditation and happiness globally for the UN, in a UN study, found that these 4 qualities were the circuits of the brain that he found were most influential in the ability to have joy and happiness. And the first was the ability to maintain positive states. And then he found that there was a brain circuitry which is different, which is on our ability to recover from negative states. So in other words, you can be quite good at maintaining positive states, but then when you fall into a negative state, you can stay there for a long time. And that explained a lot in my life. The third quality that he talked about was the importance of focus. So actually the brain circuitry for our ability to focus and pay attention is absolutely essential for our ability for happiness. And finally, there is an entire circuit of our brain that is dedicated to generosity. When we are generous or we see others being generous, that circuitry lights up, and it is one of the things that makes us happiest in our lives, which is partly why they talk about how our greatest joy is bringing joy to others. And here is a little video to talk about that.
Our greatest joy is when we seek to do good to the other.
If you want a happy life or less problem, you have to take serious concern about the well-being of others.
So over and over again, they reminded us that so core to joy and happiness is our relationships with one another, just at the central core of our humanity. And they told us that you will be surprised by the joy, as Arch put it, when you go beyond your own self-regard and focus on bringing joy to others. There's this just gorgeous moment in the film and in our dialogue when they were talking about their own death and they were talking about their own relationship. And throughout the entire week, they were teasing each other about who was going to heaven and who was going to hell. And the Dalai Lama was saying, well, you as a believer probably will go to heaven and maybe you can get me in. And then there was this other incredible moment when the Dalai Lama said, you know, I've decided I don't want to go to heaven. I want to go to hell. There are more people I can help there. And then in that just magnificent moment when they were talking about what their relationship meant to each other at the end of the dialogue, the Dalai Lama turns, as you may remember, to Arch, and he says, at the moment of my death, I think I will see your face. Actually, I think I will just say, because death was so present with us, I wanted to tell you a little story about getting to see Arch right before his death. This was during the COVID century, I think it felt like. I think it was probably 3 years, but it felt much longer. And he hadn't been vaccinated, and we were supposed to go down and show him the film, and we couldn't go because we didn't want to endanger him. The film director's mother was in the hospital, and so we canceled the trip because of COVID, which was surging in South Africa as well at that time. And I got this email from Arch that said, "Hey man, when are you coming? I want to see you in the meat." Which I think is equivalent to, "I want to see you in the flesh." And so I wrote back and I said, "Yeah, Father, I want to see you, and we unfortunately can't go, and here are all the reasons." And so he sent me 5 more emails. And they alternated between "I want to see you in the flesh" and "I want to see you in the meat." And I finally said, okay, he's telling me something. I need to go. And so the next day I booked a ticket, I booked a ticket for the next day, and I called him, and I said, "Father, I'm coming." And he said, "God bless you." And so I went down to South Africa, got to show him the film that was just finished, and got to have some spiritual counsel with him. We were talking about the parenting journey, and he said, when your kids are suffering, it's a double pain, because you feel their pain, and then you also feel some responsibility for their pain in some way. So we had this just beautiful goodbye, and we got to arrange a final Zoom with His Holiness. And so we got them on Zoom together, and they were waving at each other and teasing each other and talking to each other, even at that moment. Dalai Lama saying, "It's very easy to talk through this TV. We should do this more often." But they got to say their farewell because it ended up being their last time together. But while we were together in Dharamsala, we were able to throw a little surprise party for the Dalai Lama, and ended up having 2,500 people. And we had these trick candles that were very hard for them to blow out. But eventually, with the help of these 2 little girls, they were able to blow out the candles. And this is a picture of the Dalai Lama dancing for the first time in his life. As a monk, he's not allowed to dance. And, Archbishop Tutu, who's really, just got this amazing boogie. He's just up there boogieing all the time. And he was not going to let his friend miss out on the party. And so he gets up there, and he's all kind of Marvin Gaye sway, and he's all elbows, and the Dalai Lama's sitting there, and he's like, "Come on, get up, get up." And he gets him up, and he gets him to do a little jazz hands and a little shimmy, and it was amazing. As
These 2 will make a better day, just you and me.
So some of you may know this is a picture from the film Spinal Tap, and it's about turning it up to 11, because I thought growing up in a home with depression that my job was to run from sorrow. And what I learned in working on this project was that joy and sorrow are two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other, and you actually, if you try to numb the sorrow with alcohol, drugs, work, digital devices, whatever we do to stop ourselves from feeling the pain, we also reduce our joy. And they told us to turn it up to 11. And Archbishop Tutu was the person I have met who laughed more than anyone I have ever met, and also cried more than anyone I have ever met.
Nothing beautiful in the end comes without a measure of some pain, some frustration.
This is suffering, problem. Actually, it's the opportunity testing you.
You can turn this thing on its head, where it was going to be your enemy, you've turned it into an ally.
There's no difficulties, then always relax, and then more complain.
So the question, we asked the world for their questions before we went to Dharamsala, and of the 1,000 questions that we got, the number one question we got was not how can I have more joy in my life, but how can I live with joy in a world so filled with suffering? And that question has only become more poignant in the last years as there's been so much suffering and violence and disastrous news all around the world. And what Arch told us is that, yes, it does feel like sometimes we're going backwards, but actually it's one step backwards and then 2 steps forward, and sometimes 1.5 steps forward. But that fundamentally we have made incredible progress as a human species. Over the course, if you think about 100 years ago that we thought slavery, just 150 years ago that we thought slavery was legitimate, or that women should be second-class citizens to men. And those realities have changed dramatically. Not perfectly, there's still much more work to be done, but the reminder that we are all part of this extraordinary human project and that we are improving the reality of life on this planet. Now, there are great challenges, even as we speak to climate. And one of the amazing people that we got to work with was Christiana Figueres, and for her book, The Future We Choose, she did the Paris Climate Treaty, which may be one of the things that gives the human race a fighting chance. But they reminded us that, it's very easy, again, to have that narrow perspective and to just look at the headlines and feel the despair of this moment. But if we think about that wider perspective around humanity, we see the extraordinary hope and joy that abounds in our world. I had the incredible privilege and responsibility of giving the Tutu Peace Lecture in South Africa after Arch had passed, and they asked me to bring his spirit, no small job, and to speak about hope in humanity. So the talk I gave was about 2 truths and 3 lies about hope in humanity, which Pedro and I can discuss some during our dialogue. But they reminded us that we are fundamentally good.
We are fundamentally good. The aberration is not the good person, the aberration is the bad person.
People who see newspaper too much believe that one only event on this planet, then feel more hopelessness and feel humanity is bad and our future not much hope. Yes, there are very sad things, very negative things, but at the same time there are much more positive things.
People are fundamentally generous, you and you and you and you have the potential to be instruments of incredible compassion and forgiveness.
So, as many of you now know, we were able to film the dialogue, and here's one of the camera operators, a monk in Dharamsala. This is a behind-the-scenes picture, and we were able to make the film, the Mission Joy film, and I think there might be a little early sizzle reel. You've seen the film, many of you have seen the film, but I'll show you kind of a behind-the-scenes sizzle. But this is a picture of the Nepal earthquake that happened 75 seconds after our last members of our crew had flown out of Dharamsala. And for many long hours, we didn't know whether the people we had just left were safe. Fortunately, they were. And when disaster strikes, Arch and His Holiness told us to look for the helpers. Look for the people who are making the difference. But it brought us back to the first day of the dialogue when the Dalai Lama almost kind of presciently had said, we cannot stop the suffering from natural disasters, but the suffering from our daily disasters, that we can stop. So they told us joy is a choice, joy and sorrow are inseparable, and our greatest joy is to bring joy to others.
Sex.
Did you say that? Unfortunately, he's a Buddhist.
Unfortunately, that person is Christian.
You see, he's not listening.
I will not listen. I'm younger than you, so more energy.
You are mischievous. Behave like a holy man.
The Tibetan people are being exterminated. Their culture and religion are being stamped out.
Age 24, I lost my own country.
Amid tear gas and police dogs, Desmond Tutu led a people against apartheid.
When people decide to be free, absolutely nothing is going to stop them from becoming free. The two of us have been given an extraordinary opportunity. Nothing beautiful in the end comes without a measure of pain.
Ultimate source of happy life, inside, not outside. His face. You see, this picture, special picture, I think at time of my death, I will remember you.
From joy, we knew that we needed to address hope, and who better than to explore it with than Jane Goodall, the scientist who has explored our human nature and ape nature and hope more powerfully. During our dialogue, we can also talk about hope. This was a picture from Tanzania where we were doing the dialogues right before I found my dad had gone into the hospital and had to rush back to be with him. But we picked up the dialogues and continued to finish the book. Jane told us that, and when you read the Book of Hope, that hope is our greatest survival skill. And She gave us her 4 reasons for hope, which was the amazing human intellect, the resilience of nature, the power of young people, and the indomitable human spirit. So please join us in our work to create thriving people on a thriving planet, to create a wiser, healthier, more just world. If you want to learn about future books that I'm working on with global icons and other visionaries, we're heading off into the Amazon with the woman who discovered the intelligence and communication of trees for a book on how we can end our tree blindness and talk to trees and become rooted on the earth, which, in Manhattan, the trees were not a thing, Outside of Central Park, there was, a lot of concrete. So I'm very excited to learn about the trees. So please come to the website and sign up, and we can let you know about future projects. Idea Architects, which is the agency which has many more books, visionary books beyond the ones that I'm personally involved in. But we hope that you and Boulder will join us on this mission to create a thriving world and thriving people in time for our children and grandchildren to benefit. Thank you all so very much.
Now people will be wondering who's the short guy. So I want to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about the interaction with the Dalai Lama and the young boy in Dharamsala, simply because I believe cultural awareness and cultural humility is very important in creating systems for human thriving, flourishing, and such. So if you would just take a moment and just give a little bit of insight from the cultural awareness you've been able to gain.
Sure. And first of all, I just want to thank you, Pedro, for joining me up here and getting to do this dialogue. I wanted to thank the ASL interpreters, done such a wonderful job this evening. It's so amazing to see your words transformed into ballet so beautifully. And particularly want to thank Kathy and Amy and the entire team here who've just done such a marvelous job creating this for all of us tonight. I think that's my alarm. I got to go. Sorry. So I think that the things to know about the video are that if you look at the entire video rather than the small piece that was cut out of the video in the most sensationalist of ways, that it's really clear that the Dalai Lama doesn't see himself as doing anything but teasing the boy. He's not intending to, in front of 110 people, to exploit this boy. And I should also say that as somebody whose life has been touched by child sexual abuse, quite personally, it is a very serious matter, and if nothing else, this raises the issue culturally in an important way. The unfortunate thing, as some of the friends of mine who have been working on this issue around the world say, if we call everything child sexual abuse, then we don't actually see what really is. And the thing to know about what was going on there, if you look at the larger video, is the Dalai Lama was teasing this boy and then afterwards encouraging him to pursue compassion and to turn away from violence. He was kind of morally instructing this boy in a way that he thought was beneficial to this boy. It's also important to know that there is a tradition in Amado province, which is where the Dalai Lama originated, where grandparents give little sweets, and this is the thing that you were talking about cultural awareness, because the Tibetan people have been very distressed in how this has been portrayed and kind of weaponized, if you will, and there are state actors who would very much like to discredit the Dalai Lama. And there is this tradition in the Amado province where grandparents give sweets to their grandchildren by mouth, and then they say, now eat my tongue, because that's all I have left for you, basically, I'll give you anything, I give you my sweets, now all I have is my tongue. So in the Dalai Lama's world, and in his perception, and in his bad English, and in his mischievousness, that's what he was probably alluding to or communicating in that. But the challenge is, and in Tibetan culture, one of the things Jimpa, the Dalai Lama's translator, said, the tongue is not a sexual, it has no sexual intonations in Tibetan culture. So the Dalai Lama, as a monk and as somebody from this particular culture with its cultural awareness, didn't see anything there as sexual or inappropriate. When we see it through the lens of our own culture and very much of our sexualized perception and also our kind of outrage culture, then these things get perpetuated and perceived and then distorted in a way, which is very sad, because I think not only does it harm the Dalai Lama, and like if you look at the interviews with the boy and his mother after that experience, they felt incredibly blessed and delighted to have had that interaction, and then it gets taken in this other way. And so I think it's not only discrediting of the Dalai Lama or that the experience that was had in that room, but I think it makes it actually harder for us to really be vigilant about addressing child sexual abuse where it happens and when it happens.
Thank you for sharing that. And for all of you, I want you to know that this is, even though we're talking to each other, we're all in this together. And I want to allow, like you said, that Archbishop Tutu said, to allow what happens, what needs to happen. So to the degree that you can, I know that when we come to events like this, it's a lot of head work. We're trying to understand, because we think if we understand it, then we can do it, we can control it, we want to master it. But I want to invite you to kind of take a moment and rest with it, and sit with it, and breathe with it, and be in I don't know if you know the word conspiracy basically means breathe together. So let's be in a conspiracy. Let's be in a conspiracy of joy. I wanted us to talk about the heavy part first, and then join in this conspiracy of joy for the rest of our time that we have together, if that's fine with everybody. So beautiful. Yeah, and we have a lot to celebrate, because this is the first time we've been able to do stuff like this in person. All of our bodies are here, and I want to also thank you for bringing your bodies to this space. It's a big deal to show up anywhere, because nothing gets done if no one shows up. So thank you for showing up. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about hope, since that's the next book.
Yeah.
And I remember from the book, I believe it was Archbishop Tutu that said he was a prisoner of hope.
Yeah.
And that really stuck with me. I emerged out of the Christian tradition.
Sure.
And so when I heard prisoner of hope, I thought about it, and I wondered if you would say that hope is a prerequisite for a joyous consciousness, or at least a beginning stage of that. And if so, how would people cultivate hope when they're feeling hopeless?
Yeah, it's a great question. And obviously, prisoner of hope comes out of the Christian tradition and a scriptural reference even. And that idea, I think, is so, what I think he means by prisoner of hope is that his hope, as he said, is not about optimism. It's not about like, okay, things look good or things look bad, right? It's about a kind of deep conviction and a belief in the possibility of the future. And in his worldview, the possibility of God's world. Or us as children of God. And as he often said, we are the hands and the eyes of God. So of us to actually implement the divine will in our lives. But I absolutely think that it is very hard to be joyful if you're in despair. So this idea of hope, which was so powerful, because as I mentioned, Jane, said it is this survival trait, that is this thing that helps us individually survive, and we to survive as a species. And it exists, it originates in the middle prefrontal cortex, right here with imagination, time travel, with problem solving, language, and with, dogs have some version of hope, right? If you think of your dog at the door being like, when are you coming home and feeding me and taking me on a walk, But we have taken that kind of more basic way of hope to hope for and imagine a future for our children that we want to live into. And that hope is absolutely essential. And there are 4 elements of hope that we talk about from a psychological perspective in the Book of Hope. You need to have realistic goals, realistic pathways to get to those goals, a sense of agency or self-efficacy that you can walk that path to those goals, and finally, that you can have social support, because none of us get to those goals by ourselves.
Thank you very much for sharing that. There's so many things that you said that made me want to deviate from what I was gonna say originally. But because Boulder has been through a lot of things in the past few years, and there's an awareness of it. And one of the reasons I understand it, that they chose the Book of Joy for One Boulder was because it was in light of some of the things that have happened in our community. And I know that a lot of times when communities are resourced, there's a sense that they can be shielded from life, or that they should be able to be shielded from life, but then life shows up. So one of the things that, and I'm holding this with tenderness, that we had the King Super shooting that happened here. And I think, I'll bring in a personal side of it. Right before the King Super shooting happened, my stepbrother had been shot and killed. And I hadn't had contact with him for years. And I felt myself I created my own sense of isolation, because I was like, the people in this community won't understand that kind of violence visiting, and then it came here. And I think that for a lot of people here, I can't speak for them, and you all can share in your hearts and in your bodies and in your heads if you feel this. We look for joy as an escape sometimes from life. We want it to come and then just keep on going. Just what can I say to get joy and just stick it with it for the rest of my days? Things like that. And I've come to see that joy is a responsibility too. And when we decided, or this community decided to bring this book into the space, I wonder, how do you help people see that joy is not an escape from life, but a responsibility to life?
Beautiful question. I think joy is a revolutionary act. So joy is not an unending yoga class. Even in Boulder, where I'm from, in Santa Cruz, joy, real joy, like these two, the trait of joy is an approach to life that is liberational, because there are a lot of folks who want to steal your joy. And, autocracy does not like joy. It does not like hope. Oppression does not like joy and hope. Joy and hope. I mean, the joy that Archbishop Tutu was able to cultivate in South Africa during one of the most oppressive regimes in modern history. I mean, joy was a weapon. Humor was a weapon for a social liberation. And I think, it's interesting in what you're saying in terms of specifically in Boulder. There, the pain, one of the things the 2 lies, or 2 truths about hope from the talk. One of them was that hope is a weak response. That hope is like, let's hope for the best. But actually that hope is this really powerful commitment to the future. And it, as Jane says, it's active. There's no passive hope. Real hope is actually calls you to, if you don't have hope, then you're off the hook. It's not going to get better. It's just the way it is. And so hope actually calls you to your greatness and your responsibility. And, the second truth about hope, the first lie was that hope is passive. The second lie is that hope is personal. We think that hope is something that we have or we don't have ourselves. Hope is communal. Hope is something social that is cultivated and nurtured in relationships, in families, in communities, in nations, in our world. And so Boulder, has, and one of the things that the researchers found was like the greatest measure of community well-being was the index of hope in that community. So when there's hopelessness and despair in the communities, or even if some are well-resourced and others are not, it's like it's the fraying of the social fabric that communal hope is a kind of indicator of the health and well-being of the community. I'll share a little story. When we were driving here from the airport, and our Uber driver took a turn on one of the roads, and this truck basically sped up toward her and honked and basically aggressively, was just getting aggro, all road ragey. And, I don't know, our driver happened to be black. I don't know if it was racial. I don't know if it was just a sign of the incivility that has taken hold in our nation. But Archbishop Tutu said this beautiful thing to me, that some quality of human life on planet Earth is just our daily interactions with one another. How we treat one another on our daily interactions is what kind of adds up to our human experience. And so, why I said at the beginning that that our libraries are these sanctuaries of civility and culture, it's like these are our oases and are essential for us to protect that civility and that commons and that communal hope.
Right before we came in here, I was, because I used to be a pastor. I was a pastor for 10 years. And I was thinking about the library as a temple when I was coming down here. So when you said library as a sanctuary, I was really moved by that idea. Thinking of sanctuary, what do you think? There's a song in the tradition that I come from where the song says that I want to be a living sanctuary. How do you think it's possible for human beings to be sanctuaries of joy in the places that they show up?
It's a beautiful phrase. So Arch calls it oases of peace. Like to be an oasis of peace where the kind of peace ripples out from you. And I think that sanctuaries of joy is another beautiful phrase for that. And I think it's, what he was saying when he said he chose joy in that refugee camp. He didn't deny his grief and his sadness and the pain, but he chose to be a sanctuary of joy for those people in that camp. And I think that, it's this interesting thing. We have this term now of toxic positivity, where, and I think there are ways in which if the positivity denies the suffering, the reality of the suffering, it can be toxic or superficial, but that in reality, it's like that issue of perspective of like, there are ways to look at our life. And my dad, 10 years before he died 3 years ago, fell down a flight of stairs and had a traumatic brain injury, was in neuro rehab for a month, totally out of his mind. We didn't know if he was coming back. And, I'll never forget that, first phone call where it was like him on the other side of the line. And he had returned to his mind. And when he came back, my brother said, "I'm so sorry you had this terrible incident." And he said, "Not at all. It's all part of my curriculum." And, if we can see, actually, that's one of the lines in the Book of Joy that I tell that story, and that people have said it's touched them the most of the things that were in the book, because that is such an example of that way of seeing, life, as the Dalai Lama was so extraordinarily able to do, to see his exile as an opportunity. Talk about a reframe, And I think that we are given that opportunity in our lives to to see ourselves as the victim of those circumstances, or to see them as things that we can use for our own growth and the benefit of others. And another wonderful thing that I learned from Arch was, he said, suffering can ennoble us or it can embitter us. And it embitters us when we see it as meaningless. It ennobles us when we find meaning in our suffering and we use it to help others.
Thank you for that. When I ran into you earlier, when we first got here, I had earbuds in my ear, and I was actually talking to my mother, and my mother has dementia, and so as I was talking to her on my drive here, I was thinking about the conversation that we were going to have and the content of the book about joy, and I was looking for the joy in the conversation, even though she can't really say much. And so I was finding joy in any sign that something I said was connecting. And I remembered that they said at some part of your brain where you sing, you can still remember things. So I started singing This Little Light of Mine to see if she remembered it. And she said, "Oh yeah, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine." and I felt that joy. And we had an interesting relationship before she had a stroke that led to this. And it wasn't always joyous. And then I found this little joy in this little piece of a song. And I thought, okay, you can find it anywhere if you're looking for it, And I'm going to bring this, because we don't have that much time left for questions, so I'm going to ask you something sort of deep and
we can go as deep as you want. I know, because we've been pretty superficial for the rest of it.
Yeah. So in the context, sometimes when I look at our country, I feel like we have everything we need to create an amazing society, the one that we pretend that we've already achieved. And I'll look at all of it, but it's just this. It seems that there's this pervasive selfishness of wanting for ourselves, but not wanting for others. We haven't cultivated the generosity. And when I think about the pain and the grief and the things that kind of contend with maintaining or developing joy in this context, I think about my mom, who is a black woman in this country, brilliant person, but lived her life under constant stress, constant anxiety, constant pressure, constantly being not promoted for jobs or different things, all of the things. But she had all the tools, and the society had all the tools to allow flourishing and thriving for everyone. But we had this thing that's stuck in our society, racism basically, that hurts people, both people who are perpetrators of it and people who are on the receiving end of it. And when I think about her life and that she doesn't remember much of it, she fought for, it feels like nothing, but I try to find meaning in it. Not to put you on the spot, but you've been studying joy for out. What would you say if you had like 2 minutes to talk to our whole country about this issue and to encourage us to do the work that needs to be done to cultivate the society that we have all the tools to create? like what would you say? And that's a lot to ask. But in mind of that, there are people who have not even had a life of meaning, seemingly because of the context that we've created for some of our people.
Yeah.
What could you say to help us cultivate that joy?
That is a big question.
That's
well, first of all, I want to just say that there's a particular kind of grief that comes with losing your loved ones neuron by neuron.
Right.
And I just wanted to say, I think that's it's a very profound and difficult grief. My wife's parents both suffered from depression and dementia, and it is a very painful thing for the body to be there, but the mind and the person that you loved and knew so well, not to be leaving piece by piece, synapse by synapse.
Yeah.
So I'm just with you in that. In terms of the question, the really good question about I think it fundamentally comes down to a misperception of what is self-interest. So we see our hyper-individualism in this society, what might even be called toxic individualism, as a sign of our freedom.
Absolutely.
But it is a part of our bondage.
Right.
It chains us to a history. It chains us to a poverty, and it chains us to a hopelessness in our communities, because we are not willing to recognize what the Dalai Lama and Archbishop talked to us about, and why generosity is the final and eighth pillar, which is actually, what the Dalai Lama said was, selfish. When he talked about our ability to see that generosity as part of our own self-interest. It's wise selfishness as opposed to foolish selfishness, as he distinguished it. And that foolish selfishness is what we promote in this society. That somehow, by the kind of, it goes beyond the materialism. The materialism is a symptom of the sickness, right? But that somehow our safety, our well-being, our happiness comes from this accumulation and this sense of self-preoccupation.
Yeah.
Rather than recognizing that, as they said, we need to provide for ourselves, we need to provide for our families, but, that we've created a system where there's so much fear and threat and sense of, and scarcity. And I'm really interested in changing and creating a new game of life, which is not a game of scarcity, but a game of abundance, right? And what you were saying about, we have this amazing abundance. We have, what we've created in terms, and as a nation, and as a world, there's way more, enough. There's enough, right? And now we're going from a post-carbon reality to a regenerative economy, which is going to be, one of the things I learned from Christiana Figueres is that scarcity is, and the sense that we're in a zero-sum game comes from a carbon economy, where I got the oil and you don't have the oil. But when we all have as much energy as we want because it's coming directly from the sun,
right,
it actually fundamentally changes the game that we can play.
Yep. Absolutely.
And so I think that that sense of, wow, there is a bigger, better, more fun, more loving, more joyful game to be played in our communities and in our world. I think that's what I would say, but that might have been more than 2 minutes.
Yeah. Oh, the country needs more than 2 minutes. So thank you for that. So I want to give time for, we don't have much time, but we have some time for some questions from the audience. If anyone has anything that's burning that they want to share.
Or yeah, please, love to have your questions. I can talk to you about how Archbishop Tutu drives in traffic, if you want to know about that. There are lots of questions that that you may have, and I'm happy to answer them. Yes, please. I think there's a microphone there.
What was the most surprising aspect or characteristic of each of the two, Tutu and the Dalai Lama, that surprised you?
What surprised? So the question, great question, was what surprised me most of each of them. So, so obviously I had this 20-year relationship with Archbishop Tutu. So but I think so. To go back to the fact that he was my college hero, because we kind of went to college during the anti-apartheid struggle, and he came to speak to my college, and I was like, how does a man like this live his life? And I think that what surprised me the most was how funny and fun and playful he was. Like this great moral leader who, this Nobel laureate and this great spiritual leader, and he was just so he knew that humor is the most direct line between any two people, and so he would use that to kind of to create that love and that bond, and diffuse the power differential, right? Years, and the other thing I'll just say about it, which was another, there's just so many things that I could say that I learned and was witnessed, and just the fact that he was everything he looked like and more, but that he had this, he would be sending us cakes at Christmas every year, he was, he would shake everybody's hand. He'd go around and, we went to the Boston market and he was shaking everybody's in that restaurant's hand, right? Awesome. He was an embodiment of Ubuntu, is that we are who we are through one another, right? It is that reminder, that tribal reality that exists in Africa, but in all of our ancestors' worlds, right? That's what we've forgotten in a word, right. Is that our well-being depends on those relationships. And so he had that sensitivity to kind of really, he was so unimpressed with himself and so interested in everybody else. And it was just a gorgeous model of what that humility really looks like. Now, with the Dalai Lama, what surprised me most? Okay, well, this is just what comes to mind for the first thing: how strong his grip was. When I shook his hand, he basically kind of picked me up and moved me. And I was like, wow, this guy's got some ki, he has some strength. I think that sense, we see them both, but we see the Dalai Lama as kind of, if Arch is kind of the embodiment of forgiveness and his Holiness is kind of the embodiment of compassion, but that compassion can be fierce. That they're, we see it as this kind of, often the kind of lie about compassion is it's weak and we're turning the other cheek or we're being kind of vulnerable, right? But that there is a fierceness in that compassion, which is so powerful when we draw on it, and I felt that in his hand.
Awesome. I saw the Dalai Lama at the Boston Garden, and he was wearing a Celtics cap, and he gave this long speech, and then at the end he said, "But if it doesn't work, F it." And that surprised me. I was like, what? Yeah. So, another question in the back over here in front of the cameraman.
So I spent an embarrassingly long time thinking that you were kind of this genre-bending genius who was the author of this. After reading the Book of Joy, I thought you wrote the Book of Joy and the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And so I was curious if I'm alone in that, or if that has happened to you before, and if so, does that bring you joy? To tie it into the theme of the evening.
So I did write The Hitchhiker's Guide to Joy. That's a great question. Yes, I am often, people think I'm Doug Adams. And I would say, no, it's Doug Abrams. You know, like we were not on the Mayflower. We were in the dinghy behind the Mayflower, like by about 200 years. Well, I should aspire to be as humorous. I'm hoping my future writing can be as fun and comical. I try to bring that in with the writing, but the playfulness and the fun is great. But it does bring me joy when I am confused with Doug Adams. Thanks for the question.
I did the same thing when I first. I was like, man, he's still writing.
Wow, what planet did he show up on?
Maybe one more. Catherine.
I'm just curious if you have a perspective about the fact that they're mostly female, and excuse me my age if I'm saying the wrong gender thing here, but there are not very many males in this room, and I'm wondering about joy, and what does that really mean to us as a culture?
That is a really interesting question. I think that, we probably skew older in here as well as younger too. So that's an interesting question, as well as what does that say about who's reading books, maybe. But it is on Netflix, and it is trending with Bridgerton and Black Mirror. So I don't know. It might say something about the marketing efforts that we need for the library. But I will say we need to be on TikTok, is I think what it says. I think that, there's an interesting thing to say about gender and joy, which is, okay, so when Rachel, my wife, and I met in a feminist studies class in college, and there was this really interesting piece of research when I was in college about how gender, it was an early thing about gender being on a spectrum, but it was talking about how there are qualities that we traditionally think of as male, and there are qualities that we traditionally think of as female. And you can be high on both of those scales, it was called the BEM scale, or you could be low on both of those scales, which basically meant you didn't have much of a pulse. But it was this fascinating reframe to think about, like, what are the things that we associate with masculinity or testosterone? What are the things that we associate with femininity or estrogen, kind of hormonally? It's obviously much more complex than that reductionist view of those qualities. But I think that there's a way in which, men are permission to be angry. Women are, permission to be sad. There's ways in which culturally we circumscribe what we have access to. And I think that joy may be something that women have more access to or easily in this society, or it's seen as somehow kind of lighter, and somehow outrage is stronger, and I think that first of all I want to acknowledge the men in the room. There's some. And so, by my eye, maybe it's, 60-40, 30-70. But I think, women are often with the program much sooner than the men. Like we often say in the book business, the women will buy the books and they'll give it to their partners, right? And Archbishop Tutu, I'll kind of end with this thought, which is when we were at his 80th birthday where the Dalai Lama was on a kind of Google Hangout because he wasn't allowed to be there. And he was asked this question. He said, what do we do to bring world peace? And he said, another small question, right? And he said, turn it all over to the women. So I think, we are, we are in a century where I think the power of women is absolutely crucial to where we need to get to. I am excited about the possibility of, all of our being able to all of us being high on both of those scales of masculinity and femininity, or whatever that is. We probably don't even use those terms anymore, or those ways of describing it, but so we can just all be fully human. That's the goal.
Before I get you to sign my book, because Doug's gonna be signing books here at the end of our time together. Before I get you to sign my book, when I was listening to your response to that question, I was thinking about, I work in an area of depolarization, and there's this ideology of polarities as opposed to things being polarized, and having the high end of things that seem to be at extremes. And we did a practice with this last time, the last event, where people can say, I am on the inhale side of breathing. I'm all for the inhale side of breathing. Someone else says, well, I'm all for the exhale side of breathing. And then they decide to have a war, and they say, and we're gonna see who holds their breath the longest, and see what happens. And that's kind of what we do in
beautiful.
some way.
Yeah.
Same with the masculine, feminine energies and all of those other things. So I'm adding an extra question, if it's all right.
Bonus question.
Yeah. How do we implement joy as a tool to service the high ends of those polarities? For people to be able to have access to both their feminine and masculine natures, or whatever the term may be, to see that these things that we have positioned as being in opposition are actually part of one operation that works together to sustain life. And but we've somehow polarized or created this chasm where I think ultimately there is none. And I just wonder how joy can be maybe a bridge.
Another doozy.
You have 30 seconds.
And I should say, because some wonderful members of the Boulder community from this extraordinary company called Sounds True, life-changing, world-changing company, both located right here in Boulder, are here tonight. And they have created a joy course with the archival material from the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, and then Mpa Tutu, the Dalai Lama's daughter, Jimpa, the Dalai Lama's translator, and myself. That's going to be coming out this fall. So that's another resource for those of you on the joy journey, figuring out how to cultivate joy. In terms of the question, I think that it's really about this recognition of I think I'd broaden it from gender to all the ways that we polarize, right? Politically, socially, economically, and basically remember that, the way I think about it is all of human civilization is just a projection of our human imagination outward. Everything here that we created was just something that somebody dreamed up from some aspect of our humanity that said we need libraries, we need protection, we need cars, we need airbags, and that we need all of those aspects of our humanity. There's an amazing story from Jane Goodall, because I asked her, I said, are we 51% good or 51% evil? Another small question. And she said, we are split down the middle in her view, and we're half angel, half demon. And what determines which direction we go is the environment and the context that we create. So, and that's amazingly deep on telling us what the solution is, but it's also amazingly deep in that it totally reframes virtue and vice. All of those things that we think of as as vices or what the other group is doing, all evolved to help us survive in certain contexts, right? Aggression, like that driver who was driving, is beneficial in certain contexts. Somebody's attacking your child, that aggression. Oxytocin, the bonding hormone in women, and when they're lactating, is actually cultivates aggression to outgroups, others who are not like you in some way, right? Because you're protecting your own, right? So if we see it all as part of our humanity, again, and see those things, look at the things that we are projecting on this other group as like, what is it that we are disowning in ourselves?
Nice.
And like, what have we put in our shadow? What can't we tolerate in ourself? And I think this is most obvious in our politically polarized world today. If we can look and see what it is that we are projecting on the other group or the other side, and can we, approach it with fierce compassion, right? Which is like the Dalai Lama said, you need to save China from the negative karma it's creating. That some Chinese officials, as he points out, it's not China or the Chinese people as a whole. And so I think the more we can look and see one another's humanity, and look beyond. Unfortunately, what I learned from Jane is that kind of tribal instinct is not going away in any appreciable time scale that's going to change the equation. But what we have is, we're not going to evolve fast enough physically, but what we can evolve is our culture. And if we create that culture that honors that full humanity and that allows us to bridge those divides, then we can get there together.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And thanks to all of you, to the Library Foundation.
Thank you.
Now sign my book. No.
Happy to sign those. Thank you so much. Thank you. And to these guys, the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, they did all the heavy lifting.